There are people in the cabinet. Professor Kindiki, Prime Cabinet Secretary Mudavadi, Education CS Machogu, Roads and Transport Murkomen, and then Health Nakumincha. And at the bottom, we have CS Wahome, in Water and Sanitation, Jeru, National Treasury, Professor Ndungu, Gender, Jumwa, and Energy, Chir. Now, I've seen at least 2 names here, maybe more, 3. There were some recent cabinet changes. I know Alice Wahome was moved from water to lands, and Njeru came into water, I think from lands, correct me if I'm wrong. Aisha Jumwa was moved from public administration to gender. So you might say for them at least, they've only been in their new positions for a month or 2. Is it fair for them to be given such low ratings? Maybe they were being rated on their performance in both of the ministries in which they've served. I'm not sure how respondents were thinking about that. And also, just for the highest and lowest rated, I am not in a position to say, Tifa is not in a position to say, when we have these national power blackouts, is that really in any way the fault or the mistake of Buana Chirchir? There are a lot of people below him who are dealing with power. So I don't know where the blame lies. But, you know, the responsibility starts with the person the president appoints to sit on top of that ministry. And I even saw some calls for him to resign a couple of days ago, or was it just yesterday, after the most recent blackout on Sunday evening, together with another CS. As for Professor Kindiki, you people in the media, correctly or not, have given him very, very extensive, and I would say, in my personal view, generally positive coverage in his efforts to deal with issues of insecurity in the country. It doesn't mean to say that insecurity is no longer a problem. We still see on a pretty regular basis people being killed and injured in northern Kenya by IEDs and so on, but at least the CS is seen going out to these places, talking to people on the ground, whether it's terrorism in northeastern Kenya, ethnic clashes and livestock theft in North Rift and so on. The other day he was in Lamu. Earlier we saw him quite active with regard to the Shakahola massacre. So again, even if rather negative things have been taking place within the cabinet responsibility of insecurity, unlike Chirchir, he's not blamed for it. He's being seen as positively, actively addressing these issues. And of course, the only way to tell for certain if his active involvement is having payoffs is to start counting and to see if there's actually a decrease in the kind of incidents that are causing him and his ministry and the government and Kenyans so much concern. Also, I should say, and it's marked on the left, that in coming up with these overall ratings, Tifa used 6 variables that they were asked about. Awareness of them, that is, are they known? Trust, how much trust Kenyans have, how visible they are, how much commitment they seem to show to their responsibilities, whether issues have been resolved, and how transparent, how open is the information about their activities that allows Kenyans to know what they're doing and making a judgment about. So people were asked for each of these CSs how they score them in those 6 areas. It wasn't just a blanket kubahatisha. And then outside the survey itself, Tifa did a data search looking at the number of visits that CSs have paid to particular parts of the country as part of their work, and also travel, which we'll come to in a minute. This chart simply compares the number of reported visits in mainstream and social media in each of the zones that we use for disaggregating our data, the 9 zones, compared to the population of that zone. Now, obviously, there's, or maybe not obviously, but what is clear from the data, that these CSs, that is the top 10 rated, made far more visits to particular sites in Nairobi than to any other part of the country, even in proportion to Nairobi's population of the whole country, which is only 11%, almost 3 times as many visits. Why? Well, I think there's 2 obvious reasons for that. Number one, all these CS's offices are right here in the nation's capital, so it's easy to get out. And second, there is so much activity going on in Nairobi, given the fact that I think between 30 and 40% at least of the country's GDP comes from Nairobi. Even if the population is only 11%, these CSs, many of them have things to do outside of their offices in the nation's capital. So to say that there is a lack of balance between the number of visits and the number of people who are living in an area, I wouldn't take that as a criticism. It's just a reality, which we found interesting. When you're going out of your office to visit something related to your ministry, how do you decide where to go? Ask them. Then also, the 10 highest rated cabinet secretaries, we looked at their visits. And you can see in blue the number of visits in each of these 9 zones, and pink at the bottom, the number of trips outside the country. And to start with the second first, why is it you see 0 for the CS in Interior Kindiki and 0 for the Cabinet CS Machogu? Well, they're dealing with domestic national issues. I don't know for a fact that CS Kindiki has not gone abroad for a meeting related to global terrorism or something, but this is just based on media reports. So again, the foreign travel may relate very directly to the responsibilities in that ministry. And this is so even if the president has announced that there will be, or have already been instituted, major cutbacks in foreign travel to save money, to try to reduce government expenditure. You can see the most foreign trips have been from the Prime Cabinet Secretary, Mudavadi, and you people in the media know what he has been going abroad to do, often representing the president when neither the president or the deputy could go. Why it is that the Sports Cabinet Secretary has made so many foreign trips, and the Information Technology Secretary Owalo has made foreign trips, you'll have to ask them. Or the next time you're interviewing the president, you can ask why those 2 in particular seem to be making more foreign trips. How have they benefited Kenyans? And as far as visits to counties, not surprisingly, the leader again is Interior CS Kindiki, because he has been dealing with insecurity issues on the ground in many parts of the country. Almost double the number of visits at the local level than any other CS, which I think is understandable and I would say positive. I don't think you can understand insecurity issues in the country by sitting in an office. You need to do both. Okay, so we've given you the ratings of the president's government and cabinet secretaries. What are these ratings based on? What have been the experiences of Kenyans? in rural areas also get most of their shoes from purchasing. And in urban areas, almost all, 83%, have to buy most of their food. Maybe that figure is not surprising, but I was surprised that even in the rural population, more than 40% get most of their food from dukas, or buying it from somebody, rather than just mazawia mashambayao. I would have hoped, and I have some time living in rural areas, that more Kenyans in rural areas were getting food locally without having to buy it, which would cushion them somewhat against the cost of living. But when you see that 46% of rural Kenyans are having to buy their food, you can understand, most of their food, you can understand why cost of living with regard to food is really, really pinching. Now, we also found that 13%, small but not insignificant, of people who live in cities are getting most of their food from a shamba, in the middle column on the right. Now, is that because these people live close to where their rural homes are? Is that because the people who live on their shambas at home are producing enough that they can send them food? Because the question was about most. You might have thought, I mean, I can tell you that in the United States, I would be surprised if 2 or 3% of people who live in cities get most of their food from their own shambas in a rural area. Maybe it's between 0 and 1%. So the fact that 13% of urban Kenyans are getting most of their food from a rural shamba, it does show the continuing connection. If we ask the question of people who live in cities, are you getting any food whatsoever? Even if it's just a bag of mahindi once a month, I'm sure that figure would be much higher. But we just wanted to capture the main sort of picture of where people are getting their food from. Then we asked, over the last year, have you and your family had to reduce your expenditure on any items because of the cost of living? And you can see almost all said yes, 87%. Slight variation according to monthly income, but not much. Not much. Who are the 13% who have not had to reduce their expenditure? And why is that? Is that because people who are so poor, they had little money to begin with? Or is it because they're so rich that they've been able to draw on savings? Or maybe sell some animals or land so that they've had, at least for the time being, some extra cash? Nevertheless, when you get 87% who say they've had to reduce their expenditure, you know that almost everybody has been suffering. And then we ask them, what are the two main things of those 87% who've had to reduce expenditure that you've actually reduced your expenditure on? And a clear majority, 84%, said food. Again, you can see people who are a bit better off, earning more than 20,000 shillings a month. The figure 79% is a little bit lower for the people in the other two categories. Now, I don't know how much money you people earn every month. I certainly hope it's more than 20,000. Shillings. You might ask, why didn't we just give you the figure for people owning or earning over 100,000 or 500,000? And the answer to that is, even in a sample of 3,000, we get so few people who are earning that much money that statistically the data wouldn't have legs to stand on. You need at least 100 or 150 people in a category to present results. I would suggest to Maggie in future, we do some targeted sampling of people who are rich, so we can compare them even if they weren't collected in a random sample. we'll start with Peter King's, because he's a multimillionaire. And you can see down the line, what are the other main categories that people have been reducing their expenditure on, keeping in mind people could mention 2 things. That's why those figures add up to more than 100. Now, if the vast majority of Kenyans are spending less, and of those, the vast majority are spending less on food, it wasn't surprising for me to read in yesterday's Nation this story, urban hunger rises as economy bites. And there's some very painful examples, not just of this mother, this woman, but other people in the story, of how people, many cases, they used to have 2 meals a day, they're having now only 1. So this is the reality that these figures are reflecting. How that's going to impact on their health, even on mortality, goodness knows. But we can see the situation is extremely difficult. We also asked whether people are able to save anything at the end of each month. Fewer than half say that they can save at least something, but people who are better off on the far right, well over half can, whereas the poor people, it's only about 1/3 who can save anything. And then this question that I began with in the introductory remarks: how would you compare the economic situation, your own and that of your family, if you're in a family, compared to a year ago? And overwhelmingly, it's worse. Only 7% say better. Those who support the government, one of its political parties in Kenya, Kwanza, 11% say they're better off, whereas those who support the opposition parties, only 3%. So almost 4 times as many government supporters say they're better off. Is that really because they come from parts of the country where people are doing better, or they're better placed in the job market? Or is that just because people who are supporting the government are a bit shy to tell Tifa they're actually worse off or the same? But nevertheless, as we see, even government Kenya Kwanza supporters, 3/4, 77% say they're worse off. 91% who support Azimio say they're worse off. So again, sorry to repeat, when the president said yesterday, we are now on the right track because we've put the measures in place which is going to uplift Kenyans, not just those who are benefiting from the Hustler Fund in his bottom-up approach, but everyone in the economy. Haya, tukutane mwaka ujao, mwezi huu, alafu tupime. Let's see. And I think all of us would hope that the economy is now on the right track, so that these figures will look different a year from now, if not 6 months from now. Across the 9 zones that we use, people who say that they're worse off, highest in Lower Eastern and in Nairobi, and Central Rift and South Rift lower. Again, is that because people are suffering a little bit less in the rift zones, or because their political orientation is pro-government, so they're a little less willing to tell us? I leave that one to you. Now, there were 2 other public issues that we included in this survey, because we have seen reports about these issues in the media, and we're wondering where the figures come from and how accurate they are. So the first one is being a victim of crime and whether the crime was reported. And here you can see that in the last 3 months, 18% of Kenyans say that they've been a victim of crime. Highest in Nairobi and Western, lowest in Lower Eastern and Central Rift. But just asking those people who said they were victims whether they reported the crime to any authority, we see overall fewer than half did, only 47%. Whether the police, whether the assistant chief, whether the regional commissioner's office, anybody else. Now, you can see pretty big variations in the level of reporting from a high of nearly 2/3 in Western to lows in Nairobi and Lower Eastern. Why that is, I don't know. But as we've said in the write-up, whether someone reports a crime is likely a reflection of any one or combination of a number of factors. What kind of a crime was it? What's the relationship of the victim to the person or people who committed the crime? Do they know them? Whether whatever happened to them was already taken care of. Maybe they got their stolen goat back without having to report it, or whatever. So what determines the level of reporting is a complicated issue. But the main point is this. When we see reports, as I did a couple of weeks ago, that a study of crime in Africa showed a 16.7% increase in crime in Kenya between last year and this year, I'm asking myself, where did they get the figures? Because if not even half of people are reporting, how can you compare the level of crime in Kenya with Tanzania, Uganda, Zambia, Nigeria, Mali, anywhere else? South Africa? UDA, still the most popular party overall at 31%. And its highest popularity, to no surprise, is in Central and South Rift and around Mount Kenya. That's where they got their most votes. But interestingly, even in those three areas of its strongest support, it doesn't reach 50%. It's not half now. Why is that? And yet, President Ruto and his deputy and most of their candidates got 80 to 90% of the votes in many of those areas, in those parts of the country. ODM, which is the second most popular party overall, at just 22%. It's most popular in Nyanza, even there, under half, less than 50% at 46%. Jubilee, that used to be the ruling party, its highest area of support is on the mountain at 7%. And then I should have put KANU as most popular in Northern at 4%. Should have highlighted that. Ford Kenya most popular in Western at 8%. And Wiper most popular at Lower Eastern at 14%. And you can look at the other distributions. But just look at none. Overall, 33%. That is, we can say that none is now the most popular party. It's even more popular than UDA at 31%. Hakuna. And the question was, which political party, if any, do you support or feel closest to? Maggie, we should insert that question at the bottom. I don't know why I left it out. The actual verbatim wording of the question for this slide should be added. No response, 2% wouldn't answer the question for whatever reason. Now, if we look at the trend, since a year before the last election, that is over the last 2 years, you can see some interesting changes. I will just make reference to the big increase of those who wouldn't support any party between March and June. It's come down a little bit this time. ODM has gone up 4% since June, from 18 to 22. and UDA has gone down 3% from 34 to 31. So whereas in June we had a gap, a popularity gap of 16% between UDA and ODM, it's come down to 9%, a drop of 7%, showing that the government is definitely losing some popularity. The opposition, leading opposition party, is gaining a little, but not overwhelming. All the polls in the UK now show that Labour is far more popular than the ruling Conservative Party. And they're all saying, unless something changes dramatically, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives are going to lose the next election scheduled for sometime next year by almost a landslide. We don't have that situation in Kenya. However much evidence there is of the problems the government is facing, the alternative Azimio government is not overwhelmingly popular as of now as an alternative. Why that is, I'll leave that to you. And one explanation to conclude, we ask this question. Do you think there's any political party that actually works for the benefit of people like you, whether you support any other political party or not? A majority of 58% say encountered any new service that the government is offering?
They've tried for the first time.
We didn't. Maybe we should in the next survey. Maggie, pay that guy a consultancy fee of 10,000 shillings. It's a good idea. I'll remember that one. Have you taken advantage of or engaged any new government service or new service offered by this government? Yes? Do you have one in mind?
Because I think the flip side would be the CSs are known for their awareness, how busy they are. But then there might be others who work and are not as prominent in the media. So that's why.
I think that's true. I had to go over to NTSA the other day to apply for my new digital driver's license. And I asked, I see some people are having these new digital number plates. Do I have to get them? I was told yes. And here's the procedure. And then a couple of days later, I see NTSA wants to multiply the cost of those things. So I thought I better go and get my number plates very quickly before the price is doubled or tripled for a vehicle. But then one of the things, and I'm glad you asked that, one of the things that I pointed out in the events that have taken place is that in 3 or 4 key policy areas, the government is facing blockages from the judiciary. Maisha Namba has been declared unconstitutional, I think not enough political participation. We also had blockage on the housing levy. The government has had to go back with new legislation to try to make it comply. Also on the new health, social health fund, some civic organizations went to court to say it's discriminatory that some people who are not contributing because they're not informed won't get it. So, there's some of these new services have not yet been rolled out because of recent blockages from the judiciary. So related to your question, I think that's another important area to track. Not whether people support the court's decision, that's pretty technical for lawyers, but once they get unblocked, how beneficial do people think they are? Who will be the first person in Kenya to get one of these houses through the housing levy? I'm sure you people in the media will be doing a big story on whoever that person turns out to be. And after how long? We see some houses have started to being built. 2 very, very good questions. Any more? No. So